darkened. "You're making a selfish mistake, Sophie," he said coldly. "And don't expect to come crawling back when this little design idea collapses." Sophie stood slowly, feeling her chest tighten. "I'm not crawling anywhere," she whispered. She walked out before any of them could speak again. Behind her, she heard Anna say softly, "Henry, that was too harsh, but the damage was done." The following weeks were quiet and tense. When Sophie visited home, conversation stopped the moment she entered the room. Henry spoke to her only when necessary. His tone clipped and formal. Anna acted polite but distant, as if Sophie had betrayed the family. Brian tried calling her, saying, "Maybe you could reconsider, just to ease Dad's mind." But Sophie always answered gently, "Brian, I can't live someone else's life." She spent her days working on client projects, trying to ignore the ache in her heart. Still, every night she wondered if she had broken her family beyond repair. The retirement party planning made everything worse. Anna involved Brian in every decision. Venue, menu, decorations, while Sophie was completely left out. When she offered to design the invitations, Anna replied too quickly, "Oh no, dear. We already hired a firm." Sophie tried to hide her hurt. She wasn't asked to give a speech, wasn't consulted about the program, and wasn't even offered a ride with the family. 2 weeks before the event, an invitation finally arrived in the mail addressed to Miss Sophie Clark. No note, no warmth. She stared at it, wondering if she should even attend. For several nights, Sophie sat on her bed holding the invitation. "Maybe I should stay home," she whispered. "They don't want me there." But deep inside, something refused to let her skip it. "It's still his retirement," she told herself. "I have a right to be present." On the morning of the event, she stood in front of her closet for an hour. Too formal and she'd look like she was trying too hard. Too casual and she'd seem disrespectful. She finally chose a simple black dress, elegant, modest, and safe. "This will do," she whispered, even if she didn't believe it. The Clark Country Club was breathtaking, with grand pillars and glowing chandeliers that made the building look like a palace. Luxury cars lined the driveway as guests stepped out in shimmering gowns. Sophie arrived in her used sedan. Suddenly aware of how different she looked from everyone else. Inside, waiters moved through the crowd with glasses of champagne and soft music floated through the air. She spotted her parents near the entrance. Anna kissed her cheek quickly. "Lovely dress," she said without emotion. Henry shook her hand like she was a stranger. Sophie forced a smile. "Nice to see you, too." Sophie moved toward her assigned table and wasn't surprised to find herself seated far away from the head table where Henry, Anna, and Brian sat. Her tablemates were polite business acquaintances, people who smiled politely but didn't really care. "So, what do you do?" one man asked. "Graphic design," Sophie replied. His polite smile faded into disinterest. "Ah, nice." The conversation drifted elsewhere. Sophie stared at her untouched bread plate, fighting the familiar feeling of not belonging. She whispered to herself, "Just get through tonight. That's all you have to do." But deep down, she feared something worse was coming. During the cocktail hour, Aunt Martha appeared beside Sophie with a warm smile. "There you are," she said, pulling her into a tight hug. "You look gorgeous, sweetheart." Sophie exhaled for the first time that evening. "Thanks, Aunt Martha. I needed that." They sat at a small table. Martha leaned in. "How are you holding up?" Sophie shrugged. "Trying to survive." Martha sighed. "Your father is overwhelmed right now. Retirement is hitting him harder than he wants to admit." Sophie looked away. "That doesn't excuse everything he's done." Martha touched her hand gently. "No, it doesn't. But he still loves you." As dinner began, speeches started flowing from the front of the room. Brian delivered a heartfelt message about Henry's dedication and legacy. Business partners shared stories about Henry's leadership. The mayor presented him with a recognition plaque. Sophie watched from her seat, feeling a mixture of pride and sadness. She whispered, "Good for you, Dad." Despite everything, she admired his achievements. Henry stood tall, smiling proudly as he accepted the applause. Sophie relaxed slightly, hoping the night might end quietly without any drama. But when Henry stepped to the podium again, she noticed something different in his expression. Henry began speaking in his confident voice, thanking the crowd for supporting him over the years. He spoke with ease about his projects, accomplishments, and the future of Clark Builders under Brian's leadership. But then his eyes drifted across the ballroom and landed on Sophie. The room seemed to sense the shift. Conversation softened. Forks paused in midair. Even the musicians played more quietly. Sophie felt her heart thudding against her ribs. "Please don't," she whispered under her breath. But Henry cleared his throat again slowly, deliberately, as if preparing to address something heavy. "You know," Henry said, his gaze still locked on Sophie. "I've been blessed with a wonderful family." Brian smiled proudly. Anna placed a hand on her heart. Then Henry continued, "My son Brian has made me prouder than any father could ask for." The room nodded approvingly, but Henry didn't stop. He pointed his glass slightly toward Sophie. "But my daughter," his voice changed, sharp, cutting. Sophie sat frozen. "Has been the greatest disappointment of my life." The room gasped. Everything went silent. Sophie felt the blood leave her face. Her simple black dress suddenly felt like a spotlight burning into her skin. Sophie sat frozen as Henry's words echoed across the ballroom. A hush fell so deep that she could hear the faint buzz of the light fixtures above. Anna covered her mouth in shock. Brian stood halfway out of his chair, whispering, "Dad, stop." But Henry continued, his voice gaining force. 1 year of wasted potential. Sophie stood in the center of the crowded country club ballroom, feeling strangely small in her simple black dress. Around her, the city's wealthiest people floated through the room in glittering gowns and sharp tuxedos. Her father, Henry, had just finished his retirement speech when his eyes landed on her. She felt her heart tighten as his expression shifted. "Sophie," he called out loud enough for people nearby to turn. She lifted her champagne glass slightly, whispering, "Please, not tonight." But deep down, she sensed something was coming, something that would change their family forever. The murmurs in the room softened as Henry cleared his throat again. Sophie tried to steady her breathing, forcing a smile, even though her palms were sweating. "Why now?" she whispered to herself. She had come tonight hoping for peace, not trouble. The soft jazz playing in the background suddenly felt distant, almost muted. Guests exchanged curious glances, waiting for what Henry would say next. A woman at a nearby table leaned over and whispered, "Is everything all right?" Sophie didn't answer. She could only stare at her father, who looked like a storm waiting to break. To understand this moment, Sophie's whole life had to be remembered. The Clarks were known citywide for power and wealth. Her grandfather had founded Clark Builders, and Henry had expanded it into one of the largest construction firms in the region. Her mother, Anna, lived for charity events and elegant dinners that appeared in the society pages. And then there was her brother, Brian, perfect in every way. Henry often said, "Brian will lead the company one day." Meanwhile, Sophie spent her childhood sketching in quiet corners while her parents mingled with important people who barely noticed her. As a child, Sophie didn't dream of business meetings or skyscrapers. She dreamed of colors. She'd draw flowers, houses, and imaginary worlds with so much life that her teachers often praised her. But whenever she showed her parents a drawing, Henry would say, "That's nice, but art won't build your future." Brian would laugh softly. "Dad's right. It's cute, but not a career." Sophie swallowed her disappointment every time. Late at night, she'd whisper, "One day, I'll prove them wrong." But as she grew older, their disapproval grew, too. Until her passion felt like a quiet secret, only she understood. The first major fight came when Sophie was 17. She wanted to study graphic design, but Henry refused at the dinner table. "You will study business," he insisted firmly. "This family needs leaders, not painters." Sophie argued. "Dad, I'm good at this. I feel alive when I design." Her mother, Anna, sighed and said gently, "Sweetheart, listen to your father." Brian chimed in. "Just take marketing. It's close enough to art." Sophie felt trapped, frustrated, and unheard. After months of pressure, she accepted a compromise. Business with an art minor. But deep inside, she knew her real path was waiting. College changed everything for Sophie. Studying business felt heavy, but her art classes brought her back to life. She spent late nights in the computer lab practicing Photoshop and Illustrator, whispering, This is who I am." When she started taking small design jobs, she realized people actually valued her work. "You're talented," one client told her, handing her a check that made her eyes widen. But whenever she mentioned her progress during Sunday dinners, Henry would dismiss it. "Freelance? That won't last," he'd say. Brian would smirk and Anna would look away. Still, Sophie kept creating quietly. When Sophie graduated, Henry expected her to join Clark Builders immediately. "Your office is ready," he said proudly. But Sophie shook her head. "Dad, I want to work as a designer." The disappointment in his eyes felt like a punch. "Design," he repeated. "That's not a real job." She tried to explain her passion, but he cut her off sharply. "1 year," he said. "Get this out of your system. Then you'll come home." Sophie nodded silently. But that single year turned into many. She built a small design business that made her happy, even if her family refused to understand. Years went by and the tension grew thicker. At Clark family dinners, Brian talked about projects and business deals while Henry praised him endlessly. Sophie sat quietly, knowing her work would be brushed aside. When she shared a design award she'd won, Henry had simply nodded and said, "Nice hobby, Sophie." She smiled politely, even though her chest tightened with pain. Only her Aunt Martha ever encouraged her. "You're gifted," Martha would whisper. "Don't let anyone dim your light." Sophie held on to those words like a lifeline. They reminded her she wasn't invisible, even if her family acted like she was. 3 months before Henry's retirement party, everything exploded. He called a family meeting in his study, the room filled with framed awards and construction blueprints. "I'm stepping down at the end of the year," he announced proudly. "And Brian will take over as CEO." Brian smiled modestly. Sophie congratulated him sincerely. Then Henry turned to her. "I have an opportunity for you," he said. "Director of Marketing and Communications at Clark Builders." The offer was huge. High salary, stock options, and authority. Anna smiled as if it was a gift, but Sophie felt her stomach sink. It wasn't her dream. Henry leaned forward. "This role uses creativity. It's perfect for you." Sophie shook her head slowly. "Dad, their style is conservative." "It's not me," Brian tried to help. "We can adjust the role," he offered. "Maybe let her keep a few clients on the side." But Henry snapped. "No, she's had 11 years to play artist." Sophie froze as he continued. "It's time to grow up. This family has given you everything, and you've given nothing back." The word nothing hit her like a slap. Tears stung her eyes, but she forced her voice steady. "I can't accept it." The silence in the study became heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. Anna's teacup rattled softly against its saucer as she set it down. Brian looked between them, unsure how to help. Henry's face. 11 years of choosing childish dreams over responsibility. Guests stared openly now, some pitying, some horrified, others fascinated. Sophie's hands trembled around her champagne glass. She whispered, "Why, Dad? Why here?" But Henry didn't hear her. Or maybe he simply didn't care. Henry wasn't finished. "While Brian builds a legacy," he said, "my daughter spends her days playing with colors and computer drawings." A woman whispered loudly, "Oh my, that poor girl." Sophie felt her throat tighten. Her legs felt weak under the weight of humiliation. She looked around the room, seeing judgment in every pair of eyes. Her father, the man who raised her, was tearing her apart in front of everyone important in their world. For a moment, she considered running out, but something inside her, something deeper than fear, refused to let her shrink this time. A spark of anger ignited inside her, burning through the shame. Sophie rose slowly from her chair, her black dress moving like armor around her. The entire room turned. Brian whispered urgently, "Sophie, please don't." But she lifted her hand slightly, stopping him. She took a breath, steadying her voice. "Perfect," she said clearly, every word slicing through the air. "Then erase me from your will, too." The crowd gasped. Henry froze, his confidence slipping for the first time. His champagne glass slipped from his hand, crashing against the marble floor and shattering into glittering pieces. The sharp sound of breaking glass echoed throughout the silent ballroom. Sophie's voice grew stronger. "You think I've given this family nothing," she said. "I've given you my patience while you mocked my work. I've given you my silence while you pushed me aside. I've given you years of pretending I didn't hear the insults." People leaned forward, captivated. Anna whispered through tears. "Henry, stop this, please." But Henry just stared at Sophie, stunned. Sophie continued. "You measure success by buildings and money, but I measure it by purpose, and you've never bothered to understand mine." Sophie took a step forward, emotion shaking her voice, but not weakening it. "I've built something from nothing," she said firmly. "I've helped charities raise money, helped new businesses find their identity, helped people see their dreams come alive." Brian tried to approach her, whispering, "Let's talk outside," but she shook her head. "No, not this time." Guests were recording with their phones now, unable to look away from the fiery moment unfolding. Sophie's chest rose and fell with determination. "You call me a disgrace," she continued. "But the real disgrace is pretending love comes with conditions." Henry finally found his voice, though it trembled. "Sophie, you're making a scene." She let out a humorless laugh. "A scene? You humiliated your own daughter in front of 200 people, and you think I'm the one making a scene?" The crowd murmured in agreement. Even those loyal to Henry looked uncomfortable. Sophie lifted her chin. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm walking out of here tonight, and I'm building a design firm that will be known across the city." Her voice grew stronger. "And when that happens, remember you had the chance to support me. You chose shame instead." She lifted her champagne glass, making a small toast toward Henry. "Congratulations on your retirement," she said softly but firmly. "May it bring you everything you deserve." Then she set the glass down with a deliberate click. The sound echoed like a full stop at the end of a painful chapter. Sophie turned and walked toward the exit. Her heels clicked against the marble floor in a steady rhythm. The crowd parted, clearing a perfect path for her. Not a single person tried to stop her. Even the waiter stood still, holding silver trays mad as they watched her leave. At the door, Sophie paused for one final look. Henry stood frozen at the podium, looking smaller than she had ever seen him. Anna cried silently into her hands. Brian stared at Sophie with a mixture of shock and heartbreak. Sophie lifted her voice one last time. "And when you hire your next marketing firm," she said, "send them my regards." A ripple of stunned whispers filled the room. With that, she pushed open the doors and stepped into the night, leaving behind the weight of 40 years of expectation and stepping into something completely unknown, but finally hers. Sophie didn't remember driving home. One moment she was leaving the club, the next she was sitting at her kitchen table in the dark. Her black dress still on, her hair still pinned, her phone lit up again and again. Calls from Brian, from Martha, from family friends who'd witnessed the explosion. She ignored them all, her chest ache. "What have I done?" she whispered into the empty room. Tears slid down her cheeks, not from regret, but from the overwhelming release of years of swallowed pain. The adrenaline drained out of her body, leaving her trembling and exhausted. Her laptop was open on the counter, notifications flashing nonstop. People were already posting grainy videos from the party on social media. Comment after comment appeared. Some supportive, some judgmental, some shocked. Then her phone rang again. Brian. He didn't stop calling until Sophie finally answered. "Sophie, thank God. Are you safe?" he asked, his voice shaking. "I'm home," she replied quietly. "We need to talk," he said urgently. "Dad, he went too far. But we can fix this." Sophie wiped her face. "Brian, don't defend him. He meant every word." Brian whispered, "No, Sophie, he's hurting, too." Sophie took a shaky breath. "Brian," he said, "I'm a disappointment." He said, "My work is nothing. How do you fix that?" Brian was silent for a long moment. "He was wrong," he finally whispered. "But he's scared, Sophie. Retirement is destroying him. He feels useless." Sophie closed her eyes. "That's not my fault." Brian agreed softly. "I know, but he doesn't." They talked for nearly an hour. Brian trying to convince her to come to Sunday dinner. Sophie stared at the wall. "There's nothing to talk about," she said. "Not anymore." And this time she meant it. Over the next few days, Sophie's world shifted in unexpected ways. The videos from the retirement party spread fast. Some people criticized her, but many praised her courage. Strangers sent messages saying, "Thank you for standing up for yourself." Then something surprising happened. Companies began emailing her. Small businesses, nonprofits, even tech startups. One message stood out. "Hello, Sophie. My name is Jason. I'm the CEO of Bright Tech. I watched your story. I love your work. We need someone bold like you." Sophie read it twice, stunned. "Is this real?" she whispered for the first time. Hope flickered. She met Jason at a cafe that Friday. He was young, energetic, and uninterested in old money status. "Your designs are sharp," he said. "But what really impressed me was your courage. You don't blend in. You stand out." Sophie laughed softly. "Not everyone sees that as a good thing." Jason shook his head. "People who build things, real things, they need fire. You have fire." He slid a folder toward her. "I want you to redesign my company's entire brand. 6 months full creative control." Sophie stared at the proposal. It was more money than she'd ever made. "I'll do it." The contract changed everything. Suddenly, Sophie had steady income, exciting work, and clients who respected her. She worked late nights with a smile, sketching logos, building color palettes, and designing brand systems that felt alive. "I forgot how good this feels," she whispered as she pinned her drafts to her wall. Jason emailed her weekly. "Amazing work," he'd write. "Keep going." For the first time in years, Sophie didn't think about Henry's approval. The weight she'd carried since childhood slowly faded. She felt lighter, stronger herself. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she was finally moving forward. One Sunday afternoon, Sophie met her Aunt Martha for lunch. Martha hugged her tightly. "You look brighter," she said. Sophie smiled. "I feel brighter." They talked about her new projects, her clients, her ideas. Martha's eyes sparkled with pride. "You're building something real, Sophie. Something beautiful." Sophie nodded. "I'm finally doing what I love." Martha leaned closer. "Your father has been reading about your work. He won't say it out loud, but he's impressed." Sophie looked away. I don't need his praise anymore, but deep in her chest, she felt a small, complicated ache she couldn't quite name. 6 months later, Sophie stood inside a small industrial loft, her new office. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, hitting the brick walls where she'd hung her best designs. Her new hire, Nora, walked in carrying coffee. "This place is amazing," she said. Sophie smiled proudly. "It's ours." They spent the day arranging desks, choosing colors, and setting up equipment. "We're really doing this," Nora laughed. Sophie nodded. A full design studio, our own space. She ran her hand over the smooth wooden table. "This is what I dreamed of when I was 17. And for the first time, the dream felt real. Their business called Sophie Studio grew quickly. Word spread about Sophie's bold style and clean designs. Non-profits hired her. Restaurants hired her. Jason referred other tech companies to her. Soon she had a small team. Nora as lead designer, Paige as operations manager, and 2 interns eager to learn. The office buzzed with energy, creativity, and laughter. Every Friday, they held Idea Hour where everyone shared wild concepts and new approaches. Sophie looked around one evening and whispered, "I built this." She felt full. Not because Henry finally approved, but because she had finally approved of herself. 1 year after the retirement party, Brian called again. "Dad wants to see you," he said quietly. Sophie stiffened. "Why?" "He's been different," Brian replied. "He's volunteering. He's quieter and he's proud of you, Sophie. He wants to apologize." Sophie stared out her window. Part of her wanted to slam the door on the past. Another part wanted closure. "Fine," she said, "but we meet in public, and this isn't family counseling." They met at the same country club where everything had fallen apart. Henry waited in a quiet corner, looking older, smaller, less certain than she remembered. Henry stood slowly as Sophie approached. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. Sophie didn't speak. Henry took a breath. "I was cruel. I humiliated you. I let fear turn into anger." Sophie's throat tightened, but she stayed silent. "You didn't deserve any of it," he continued. "And I'm proud of you. Truly proud." His voice cracked. "You built something without my help. I should have supported you." Sophie stared at him, unsure what to feel. Hurt, relief, anger. Henry swallowed. "I know I can't fix everything, but I wanted you to hear that at least once." Sophie sat across from him, the weight of 2 years pressing between them. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Your apology means something. But my life isn't waiting for your approval anymore." Henry nodded slowly. "I know," Sophie stood. "I hope you find peace in your retirement. I found mine." She walked toward the exit. Sunlight spilling through the tall windows. Outside, the air felt warm and new. She took a deep breath and whispered, "I choose me now." Then she headed back to her studio, her team, her purpose, her life. Sophie had lost a family's approval, but gained her own freedom. And that was the greatest victory of